Is Lewis Hamilton really back, or was what we saw in China something much more dangerous for the entire grid? Because while many were talking about who had the fastest car, there is a detail that is going completely unnoticed, and that is that the numbers are revealing something that no one wants to admit. Hamilton was not only better, he was brutally superior in execution, management, and race control. And the most disturbing thing is not that. It's that someone who knows him better than anyone, someone who always has something to say, this time has decided to remain completely silent. What did Nico Rosberg see in that data to say absolutely nothing? The China 2026 race cannot be understood from a surface, because if you stick with the result, or who seem to have the best car, you completely miss what really happened on the track. What we saw was a silent difference, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but absolutely evident when you look at the data in detail. And that's where it all begins. From the beginning of the weekend, the context was clear. Mercedes started with an advantage. They had the strongest package in terms of traction, energy efficiency, and overall performance. Ferrari, on the other hand, was one step behind, in theory without the necessary tools to dominate. But what Hamilton did was completely break that logic. He didn't try to push the car beyond its limits. He didn't look for a miraculous lap or spectacular maneuver. He built something much more dangerous, a perfect management race. And this is where the real difference begins to be noticed. While other drivers attacked the tire, looking for immediate performance, Hamilton understood from the first moment what the optimal window for the hard compound was. It was not about going faster on a specific lap, but rather maintaining a constant pace without causing a drop in performance. That concept, which seems simple, is extremely difficult to execute in today's Formula One, because it involves sacrificing tenths at the beginning to gain seconds at the end. The data leaves it completely exposed. During his long stint, Hamilton maintained an almost unreal consistency with minimal variations between laps, while others, including his own teammate, began to progressively lose performance. That difference does not appear suddenly. It is not visible in a single moment. It accumulates, lap after lap, until the final result is inevitable. And when you review the telemetry, you understand that it was not a coincidence, it was pure execution. But there is an even more important point, and that is how Hamilton managed the energy. In this new era, the ERS and energy distribution are not just tools, they are part of the piloting. And this is where your experience makes a brutal difference. It did not depend solely on the engineer. He himself was reading the race, adjusting deployments, identifying areas to regenerate or attack according to the behavior of the car and the track conditions. This allowed him to always stay within the ideal window without compromising the end of the stint. Most disturbing of all, this performance was not perfect in the traditional sense. There were times when he lost positions, situations where something didn't work as it should, but even there, his ability to rebuild the race was superior. He didn't panic, he didn't force mistakes, he simply returned to his plan, as if he were clear that the result was going to come through pure management. And so it was. When you put all this together, constant pace, controlled degradation, energy management, and race reading, you understand why this performance changes the perception of the championship. It's not just that Hamilton has been fast, it's that he has shown that he can win without having the best car, relying on something much more difficult to replicate, total control of each variable. And right at that point, when the data is so clear and the execution so clean, is where the noise disappears and the silence begins to outweigh any analysis. And it is at this point where the story stops being simply a great performance and becomes something much more uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Because it's one thing to have rhythm, and another completely different to understand why you have it, and how to replicate it lap after lap, without deviating even 1 millimeter from a plan. What the data after China reveals is not only that Hamilton was faster, but that he operated in a different dimension within the same car. While most drivers are still reacting to what the car gives them in each phase of the race, he is already anticipating what is going to happen 3 or 4 laps ahead. And that changes absolutely everything. If you analyze the long stint in detail, you find the key point of the entire race. There are no peaks, there are no moments where it attacks in an obvious way. What there is a progressive construction of the result. Each turn is designed to protect the next. Each decision is aligned with the final objective. While others begin to suffer from a famous tire cliff, that abrupt drop in performance, Hamilton simply never reaches that critical point. And it's no coincidence, it's total wear control. This is where the internal comparison becomes devastating. With the same car, same strategy, and same conditions, the difference not only appears, it is amplified as the laps pass. because while his teammate begins to lose tenths per lap in the final phase of the stint, Hamilton remains within his ideal window, without deviations, without errors. That's the difference between driving fast and driving with championship intelligence. But there is a detail that takes all this to another level, and that is energy management. In Formula 1 of 2026, it is not enough to take care of tires. You also have to manage the battery as if it were a constant strategic resource. And here Hamilton not only executes, but dominates. During the race, he was able to adjust its energy usage in real time, identifying exactly when to deploy and when to recover, maximizing performance without compromising the end of the stint. It's like he's running with more information than everyone else. This type of control has a direct consequence. It eliminates chaos. While other drivers enter phases of uncertainty, unexpected degradation, loss of rhythm, need to correct, Hamilton turns the race into a linear, almost predictable process. And when a driver achieves that, he stops depending on the perfect car because he's capable of squeezing any package above his theoretical performance. And this is where everything starts to get really uncomfortable. Because if this was possible without having the best car, what happens when Ferrari manages to close that gap? China's performance is not just an isolated result, it is a signal. A clear warning that Hamilton is not simply adapting to Ferrari, he is starting to shape the championship in his own way. That is why the silence around this performance is not coincidental. Because when the data is so clear, when the difference cannot be justified with external excuses, the only thing left is to accept an uncomfortable reality. There is a pilot who is understanding this regulation better than anyone. And the most dangerous thing of all is that this barely seems like the beginning. And then we come to the final point where everything fits together and where this story stops being just a brilliant performance and becomes a direct statement to the championship. Because what happened in China was not an isolated case. It was not a combination of favorable factors. It was a structural demonstration of dominance in the variables that really decide stocks. When you analyze the entire set of rhythm, degradation, energy management, and strategic execution, you realize that Hamilton did not gain time in specific moments. He built it constantly, invisibly, and completely inevitably. There was no magic turn that defined his career, no decisive overtake that changed everything. It was something much colder, the perfect accumulation of correct decisions. And there is the key that redefines the entire panorama. Because this type of performance does not depend on external circumstances. It does not depend on having clean air or a risky strategy that turns out well. It depends on something much more difficult to replicate, complete understanding of the car, the regulations, and the race itself. It is a level where the pilot stops reacting and begins to control absolutely everything that happens around him. That's what makes this performance a real warning. Because if Hamilton is able to generate this difference without having the best car, then the margin for growth is what is truly worrying for his rivals. We're not looking at a performance ceiling, we're looking at an extremely solid foundation to build on. And this is where Rosberg's silence makes complete sense. Because when someone who has shared telemetry with you, who knows exactly where the real limits of that level of piloting are, stops talking, is because they recognize something that does not need an explanation. The numbers don't just show that Hamilton was better, they show that he is operating on a plane that very few can achieve. This is the moment where the narrative of the championship changes. It is no longer a question of whether Ferrari can catch up to the other teams, nor whether Hamilton can fully adapt. That phase is over. The real question now is, who can match this level of control over a full season? Because if China made something clear, is that when Hamilton enters this state, that mode where everything is under control, where every lap has a purpose and every decision adds up, he stops competing just for positions. He starts competing for the championship. And most disturbing of all is that the numbers suggest that this was not a performance peak, but the beginning of something much bigger. And in the end, it all comes down to an idea that is as simple as it is uncomfortable for many. In China, the car did not win, the strategy did not win, the absolute understanding of the game won. Because when the data is put on the table, interpretations disappear. It no longer matters who seemed faster in qualifying, nor which team had the best base. The only thing left is what really decides long races: consistency, management, and control. And in each of those aspects, Hamilton was a step or several ahead of the rest. The most powerful thing about all this is that we are not talking about a spectacular performance in the traditional sense. There was no visible epic, there were no chaotic moments that defined the result. It was something much harder to detect and much more dangerous, a perfect execution that built lap after lap without making a sound, until the difference was impossible to ignore. That is why Rosberg's silence is not a coincidence, it is a consequence. Because when the data is so clear, when superiority does not depend on external factors, but on pure execution, there is no argument to be made. All that remains is to observe and accept. And now, with all this on the table, the real unknown is no longer what happened in China, but what comes next. Because if this is the beginning, if this is the base level from which Hamilton is operating, then the championship may be taking a direction that very few expected. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.